This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But let's start with a quick run through the markets for you. Nigeria's bourse, the NSE over there, is still the best performing one in Africa among the ones we do track here. But December has really been just about a flood of red ink. The main index has fallen by about 1.3% so far in the month. It closed 1.27% lower today. Kenya's main index is still languishing under 1,800 points, up about 0.4% in today's session. The biggest index component, Safaricom, was down 0.9% today, but it's still 3.7% higher so far in the year. Another index component, Diageo-owned EABL, picked Jane Kuruku as its next managing director. She was, of course, before this, the managing director of KBL, its subsidiary. She is the first Kenyan woman to be in charge of that regional brewing firm. Here's what's coming up tonight. The IMF asks cash-strapped Zambia to redraft its economic policy. Restaurant owners in Tunisia protest against the extension of curfew hours in order to contain COVID-19. And Brexit deal talks still continue well ahead of the December 31st exit of the UK from the EU. Our starting point tonight, however, is in Zambia, where the International Monetary Fund says the Southern African nation must redraft its economic policy to make its public debt load a lot more sustainable. This week, in a meeting in the capital, Lusaka, Zambian authorities made a formal request to the Washington-based lender for finance arrangement in order to buttress its reform program. The fund says it will assess the request in the weeks to come. Zambia became the first African country to default on its loan repayment last month due to the coronavirus pandemic. The $3 billion in outstanding Eurobonds is not the copper-producing nation's only debt, however. It also owes another $1 billion in bilateral debt, $2.1 billion to multilateral institutions, and another $2.9 billion to commercial lenders. Elsewhere, the housing deficit in Nigeria has been a recurring conversation in the past couple of years. Nigeria is currently constructing fewer houses than what the population actually demands, and the cost of getting into these houses is way beyond the reach of most ordinary citizens. From Abuja, CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam explores how this increasing population and the mass rural to urban migration could worsen matters in the housing market in Africa's largest economy.
Urban settlements springing up daily in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. But a good number of the houses here are empty. That's because they're costly. It costs an average $11,000 yearly to lease an apartment here, or at least $200,000 for an outright purchase, whereas minimum wage in Nigeria is less than $950 per annum. This has forced the majority of urban dwellers to buy houses in the suburbs.
Every day, we are producing children. People are getting married. People are graduating from school. Yeah. But the supply of the houses is not in line with the development that is taking place. While we are producing a geometric progression, we are building the houses at arithmetic progression. If the government is only building the houses, and the government is not thinking about the access to the houses or the infrastructure for the houses, for the estates, it becomes a problem. These are the complexity of the issue. The developer we are talking about, if it's building the estates and it's providing the infrastructure, the private infrastructure, the secondary infrastructure, it cannot make the houses can't be affordable.
A recent report by audit firm PricewaterhouseCoopers puts Nigeria's housing deficit at about 17 million units. It says that the country would need to build about 700,000 new houses annually to close the housing gap. But just less than 100,000 houses are constructed yearly. Nigeria's property market is bedeviled with several challenges, from costly property registration and construction to unfavorable laws. Only about 5% of the housing units are financed with a mortgage.
If you make the infrastructure in the rural areas better and create jobs, there will be no what we are saying, rural to urban migration. What is making the city to be congested, housing problem to be more pronounced, is because those who are living in the rural areas, they don't have good facilities. There are no jobs. As I'm talking to you, there's no foreclosure law in the federal level. If the state government can really take the bull by the horn and pass the foreclosure bill into law, that is one of the best ways to go. Where there's no mortgage system, there's no way people can have access to houses. In a way, it should be. It means business will have to be on cash and carry. Where the interest rate is at 25%, there's no way mortgage system can work.
Abating the acute housing deficit is one thing that would require a collective responsibility. It's estimated that Nigeria would need to invest $400 billion for the next 25 years to bridge the housing gap. So industry watchers are hoping for a total policy overhaul to boost investors' confidence in the housing sector. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
In East Africa, Uganda to be specific, the government is working on an interconnection between its grid and that in South Sudan so that power can be exported across the border. That's according to the Uganda Electricity Transmission Company. Now, that interconnection is expected to be wrapped up in 2021. It's part of a broader strategy to create a regional platform through which the East African Community member states will be able to deliver stable power supply. Countries within the East African Community established a collaborative under the Eastern Africa Power Pool. The move seeks to help countries with insufficient electricity generation capacity to get access to affordable power at a relatively low cost from within the region. Uganda currently has an installed generation capacity of 200 megawatts, but local demand only uses roughly half of that. Egypt and the United Kingdom have signed an association agreement to establish partnership and secure free trade between the two sides. Now, the deal is expected to come into force after the UK's transition period to leave the EU ends in January 2021. It will give British firms and consumers continued preferential access to the North African market. From Cairo, here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim.
The UK-Egypt agreement will allow businesses from both sides to benefit from preferential access to their markets after the end of the Brexit transition on December 31st. According to a joint statement, the new agreement will provide tariff-free trade on industrial products, liberalization of trade in agriculture, agri-foods and fisheries.
The agreement focuses on fisheries and agricultural products. Recently, Egypt has given extra attention to promoting these two items. Exporting food products is a priority for the government. An important aspect is that you create new markets and new sales points for Egyptian products with easier access and less complicated procedures than in the EU market.
Bilateral trade between the UK and Egypt was about $4.7 billion in 2019. Experts believe the agreement can help raise this number by 15% in 2021. Egypt's main exports to Britain are petroleum products, fruits and vegetables, ceramics, steel and iron, and fertilizers, while UK exports to Egypt are oil, pharmaceuticals, machinery, vegetables, and electrical appliances.
This agreement will allow for partnerships between factories in Egypt and the UK through technology transfer and the transfer of production lines. We can benefit as well from human resources and labor training initiatives in the manufacturing industry.
Officials say the deal also opens the door for more investment opportunities. The UK is one of the largest investors in Egypt, with over $5 billion investments in the 2019-2020 fiscal year. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
All right, then a quick run through some company headlines. Let's start in telecommunications. MTN Group is looking to sell and lease back part of its portfolio of 13,000 telecom towers in South Africa. MTN is considering the strategic and financial merits of that plan. The move would essentially build on similar transactions that Africa's biggest wireless carrier has completed in other markets like Ghana and Uganda. Elsewhere, the tech firm and mobile manufacturer Nokia faces a legal suit after a Kenyan company was allowed to privately prosecute its directors for illegal tax records. A court in the Kenyan capital gave Techno Service Limited the green light to privately prosecute Nokia and its agents for unlawfully obtaining its tax filings and records from the Registrar of Companies. The firm is alleging that Nokia obtained that information for purposes of defeating justice before an international arbitration tribunal. Egypt is set to offer the national company for producing and bottling water and the Wataniya Petroleum Company for private sector investment. The two firms will be offered before being listed on Egypt's stock market. They're owned by the National Service Products Organization, or the NSPO, which follows the Egyptian armed forces. And alphabet unit Google and digital advertising firms are the targets of fresh privacy complaints filed in 6 EU states. Now, the complaints are over the way they sell ads to potential advertisers through a bidding process. Real-time bidding systems apparently are being based on collecting people's browsing history, which may in turn reveal a lot of intimate personal data, which is then broadcast to hundreds of thousands of companies so they can then auction and place ads. Consumer consent, according to these suits, is not sought. That's a run through your headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Plenty more in the pipeline, including this. The Federal Trade Commission is suing Facebook. It's accusing it of stifling competition. And restaurant owners in Tunisia are protesting against the extension of curfew hours as part of pandemic containment measures.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sunitra. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's head over to the United States, where federal regulators, specifically the Federal Trade Commission, and over 45 state attorneys general have sued Facebook. Now, the lawsuit essentially accuses a social network of undertaking illegal actions to buy up rivals and essentially stifle competition. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission is specifically seeking a permanent injunction that could, among other things, require the company to divest its assets, including Instagram, for which Facebook paid $1 billion, and WhatsApp, for which it paid $19 billion, effectively breaking up Facebook in its current form. With the filing of these twin lawsuits, Facebook becomes the second big tech firm to face a major legal challenge in 2020. The U.S. Justice Department sued Alphabet's Google back in October to accuse a $1 trillion company of using its market power to fend off its rivals. All right, then, some interesting developments in the world of tech. Let's explore what this means for Facebook. John Terrett joins us now live, of course, from New York. So, John, the Federal Trade Commission didn't really object to the purchase of Instagram or Facebook many years ago. So why is it looking for an unwinding of those purchases now?
Yeah, 8 years ago. That's when they bought Instagram, 8 years ago. And we have a comment on that coming up in just a second from Facebook, who've been eager to comment this morning here in the United States on what's going on. I mean, look, you know there's been a head of steam building up for a very, very long time about these FANG companies, you know, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, but particularly Facebook, you know, kind of, there's the whole political thing going on where those political ads are sometimes run and sometimes aren't. And then you buy a magazine and you look at a pair of headphones, you think, oh, there, maybe I'd like to buy those one day. And then the next thing you know, those same headphones are cropping up in your Facebook feed every 5 minutes. It's as if Facebook is tracking you. So that's kind of the background to all of this. But what's happened in the last 24 hours is that the Federal Trade Commission, in other words, the United States government, has teamed up with almost all of the states. And they're basically saying, look, we think Facebook is a monopoly. And beyond that, that they buy up these companies like WhatsApp and Instagram, which they did indeed pick up in 2012. They buy them with a view to burying. It's called buy to bury technique. Now, if it can be proved that Facebook had a strategy to do this, then that is actually illegal. And what it means is that they buy these companies with a view then to crushing all the other companies that are out there doing something similar. Now, Facebook has commented today and they say, look, basically WhatsApp and Instagram are only as successful as they are because we, Facebook, put in billions and billions of dollars, and we, Facebook, have applied to those companies our own expertise built up over many, many years. And I will tell you that Wall Street thinks, well, hang on a second, it's all very well that this allegation has been made by the government, but look at Twitter, look at Snap Inc., and look indeed at the controversial TikTok, and all of them have never made so much money in their lives. They're all doing very well. Now, part of that, of course, is because of COVID-19. They're kind of stay-at-home stocks, as you were. But nonetheless, it is something that is now going to go on for many, 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 many months. This is not going to be resolved by next Wednesday. This is a long fight that we're in for. And I will tell you one other thing, that Joe Biden, who is the presumed president-elect, has let it be known in the course of the run-up to the election that he's not adverse to seeing the wings being clipped of some of these FANG stocks, particularly Facebook. So Facebook is going on a charm offensive against the new Biden administration, led by Nick Clegg, who's the former Deputy Prime Minister in the United Kingdom and the former head of the Liberal Democrat Party there. He's trying to convince, and will be doing so in the future even more, the Biden administration that Facebook is really innocent in all of this and a good thing.
Indeed, and that builds up to my next question, because a case of this nature tends to build on the concept of you've done some kind of harm. If not to the market, you've inflicted some sort of harm to the consumer. Specifically with the FTC case, what is the harm that is being alleged here? Because as you say, Facebook says, look, we've built up these companies. WhatsApp has 1.5 billion users around the world. It's got massive potential for payments. We're not the bad guys here. So what's the harm allegation here?
Well, the harm allegation is that they're acting as a monopoly, and that's the thing. Acting as a monopoly is actually illegal if it can be proved, and that's going to be the difficult thing. And as you say, and as I said, Facebook has riposted to this by saying, look, you know, these companies are only successful because we put our money in and we put in our expertise. But unfortunately, if it can be proved that there was a strategy in Facebook, if Mark Zuckerberg and the others who run the company, if it can be proved that they set out to actively harm the competition, well, that under US law is illegal, and that is the core of this particular case. But as I say, don't expect it to be settled anytime soon. And it reminds me very much, I remember covering in the late 1990s, reminds me very much of the Microsoft Netscape case. If you remember then, Microsoft was accused of keeping Netscape's browser out of its software illegally. And the case rumbled on for many, many years and eventually was essentially settled out of court. But you know, another thing that's worth making the point, and that is that the worst case scenario for Facebook here, I mean, Facebook shares fell 2% on the news 24 hours ago when it first came out. And 2% is not very much. This morning, it's lunchtime here in America now, the shares are down about 0.7%, so less than 1%. And, you know, the worst case scenario is that WhatsApp and Instagram could be sold off and floated. So I think Facebook as a company and Facebook as its shareholder body is not probably going to suffer very much.
Indeed, almost reminds you of Standard Oil, if you know, go all the way back to 1911. But from a fundamental perspective, does this really change the investment case for putting money into Google? Because its shares are up over 35% so far in the year. I mean, given how investors are trading on this stock, it doesn't seem like they're really concerned.
Well, there's a lot of money washing around at the moment because of the stimulus coming in from the federal administration and from other areas around the world, and investors have access to that money, and it's not going into bonds because the bonds aren't returning anything. And also, of course, you know, gold is very expensive at the moment. It has been for a long time. So really, stocks is the best place to put your money if you wish to try to grow it, and that is basically what's happening. Is it a bubble? Well, that's another question for another day. But the answer to your question directly is, well, potentially, you know, yes, it does, because you know, the cat is out of the bag now. We know that the Democrats, in the form of the incoming Biden administration, one of the things that they're always saying is that they are keen to try and clip the wings of these giant companies. And we've been waiting for a long time for somebody in authority to come along and actually take that view. Now it's going to arrive on the 20th of January. So quite potentially, yes, a case like this could affect the other FANG stocks for the reason I said just now. Biden is known to be keen to try and not hobble them or harm them, but just reduce the power that they have. And the other thing that could happen, of course, is if this runoff election in Georgia, if it goes the way of the Democrats and they end up with a 50-50 majority, as it were, in the Senate, the upper house, if Democrats have 50, Republicans have 50, and then the presiding vote goes to the president, the Vice President-elect, Kamala Harris, well, that could force a big sell-off indeed of stocks generally, not least of all the FANG ones, including Google and Facebook.
Indeed, we'll see how this plays out. Fascinating stuff. We'll certainly keep a very close eye on it. John Terrett in the Big Apple, thank you very much. Now, from New York, let's head over to Tunisia. The country has extended a nighttime curfew until the end of the year as part of efforts to tackle a spike in COVID-19 cases. But this is happening amidst growing discontent and anti-government protests in the North African state. Authorities decided to maintain a curfew from 8 p.m. until 5 in the morning in the 24 governorates every day of the week. CGTN's Adin Chouachi filed this report.
The decision to extend the nighttime curfew was approved by the Scientific Committee at the Ministry of Health and the COVID-19 Task Force. Authorities insist that masks remain mandatory in all open spaces.
It is scientifically proven that wearing the face mask reduces the percentage of viruses up to 90%. One does not wear the mask 100% the whole day. One can take it off to breathe or drink, or if there's no one around. There is the asymptomatic, the symptomatic and the dangerous form of this disease. The mask, as well as social distancing, saves lives and limits the form of infection.
The government announced that cafes may remain open until 7 p.m. but must remove their chairs from 4 p.m. onwards, while shisha pipes remain banned in all shisha bars and cafes. Thousands of cafe owners and workers protested in many cities to denounce the recent decisions, which they say will further deepen the economic crisis.
We don't accept the decision to remove the chairs and tables and to close at night. Consumers come to cafes to sit and discuss. Our situation is difficult. We have unpaid bills and rents for several months. Hundreds of cafes have shut down forever. This is an arbitrary decision.
The coronavirus is dangerous, but unemployment is deadlier. The government prevents us from working without offering any alternative or concrete financial aid. This is unacceptable.
The Tunisian Confederation of Industry revealed that 80% of restaurants shut down indefinitely due to the pandemic. Consequently, many related economic sectors were affected.
We can no longer support this situation. It's catastrophic. Many professionals are impacted because restaurants work with butchers, vegetable merchants and bakers. Many economic sectors depend on restaurants and cafes.
The National Committee to Combat Coronavirus also approved the decision to limit to 30 the number of people allowed to attend private events, including funeral ceremonies and marriages. The Tunisian government has reported an increase in the number of protests and sit-ins since the outbreak of the second wave of the pandemic in September. Analysts maintain that the current economic situation could plunge the country into an unprecedented social and political crisis. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
As the holiday season starts, South Africa has resumed long-distance train services between major urban centres after a 9-month suspension. CGTN's Angela Coppola explores how this resumption will adapt to the pandemic.
The service, known as Shosholoza Mail, runs between Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, Port Elizabeth and East London. It was officially reopened recently as the peak Christmas season begins.
I don't think there's a problem with it as long as they keep to the social distancing, and that might be an issue. Those trains got 3 different classes, and the seater class, which is the least expensive one, can take up between 80 and 85 people per coach. And so social distancing might be a problem.
One of the concerns initially was railway safety and security. There have been reports of communities invading railway stations and vandalizing the trains and rail tracks.
Because the trains are operated on Transnet lines, and the Transnet trains has never stopped running. They never stopped their security contracts like PRASA did, so that they don't have on the open lines the same security or safety issues that PRASA have. And the frequency of trains is also much less.
There will be many people who will make use of the service, especially during the holidays, and stay off the country's roads during the festive season.
You can also, if you want to go on holiday, even put your vehicle on the train. They've got these coaches that can carry cars. When you get to Durban or Port Elizabeth or Cape Town, you can go on holiday in your own car. But I think, personally, I would believe it's a safer option if you can travel first class or the premier class.
Station security and overcrowding is a concern, however, especially as the country enters the traditional festive season.
Because PRASA is running really on skeleton staff in Bloemfontein or some of the other smaller stations, they don't have enough security personnel to control the crowds, and that is a concern. It's maybe my only concern with this initiative is the fact that overcrowding of trains will take place.
Long-distance travellers now have another option to use that train service between the major cities on the way down to the coast. But they need to be practicing social distancing. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to the business of mobility, clean mobility in this particular case. Zimbabwe now has Nissan Leafs running around in the country. This comes as the country's preparing for a gradual shift from using a lot more internal combustion vehicles to more electric ones. Zimbabwe's energy regulator says the vehicles will support the country's renewable energy strategy. Here's CGTN's Farai Mukutuya with the details.
The vehicle technology of the future has arrived in Zimbabwe, and authorities hope that cars like this will become the kings of the streets. Although the country is getting on board the electric vehicle drive late, it's confident of making up ground.
We're still a long way as a country, but we want to leapfrog. There's already groundwork which was done, so we don't have much work to do in terms of breaking ground. We just have to take advantage of what has already been done.
A draft e-mobility policy has been developed to address the key questions around infrastructure and the country's long-standing power generation challenges.
What we also want to promote is the use of renewable energy in charging electric vehicles. It will be pointless that we take out internal combustion engines, take out fossil fuels, but at the same time we replace it with thermal power. You know, it will be defeating the whole purpose of e-mobility. So we're going to be encouraging that service stations, embrace renewable energy.
Proposals are also being tabled to extend incentives to players that invest in e-mobility infrastructure and those that import electric vehicles.
At the moment, the electric vehicles are a bit on the high side because there's no mass production. So we want to then try and bring down the cost so that through incentives so that we can have more vehicles coming into the country.
Zimbabwe's government has banned the importation of motor vehicles that are more than 10 years old in a bid to save foreign currency but also cut carbon emissions. It's seen as a further statement of intent to promote clean energy. Farai Mukutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. Brexit trade deal talks still continue, but what outcome should you expect? We'll have the latest from Brussels. And tourism industry players are concerned as Indonesia is considering a total ban on the manufacturing and sale of alcohol.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces towards the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Welcome back to the program. These are some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Let's start with the WHO. The World Health Organization is saying that Africa as a whole will need at least $9 billion to procure and distribute 1.4 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines. The WHO's Immunization and Vaccines Development Program Coordinator, Dr. Richard Mihigo, says there's a need to ensure equitable and timely distribution of these vaccines. He shared this at the WHO Africa online press briefing on scaling up preparedness for the COVID-19 vaccine rollout across the continent. Ghana's incumbent head of state, Nana Akufo-Addo, has won re-election in a tightly contested presidential race. He came up against the former president, John Mahama, and 10 other candidates. The Electoral Commission results put Nana Akufo-Addo in the lead with nearly 52% of the total votes cast. The number of refugees across the world has now reached 18 million, even as COVID-19 continues to affect the UNHCR's resettlement programs. Many of these refugees are from Africa. The UNHCR believes that the only way to reverse this trend is to stop ongoing conflicts on the continent. And Egypt's official statistics agency is reporting that the poverty rate in the country has dropped for the first time in 20 years. It went down from 32.5% in the 2017-2018 fiscal year down to 29.7% in the 2019-2020 fiscal year. Main cities like Cairo and Alexandria have witnessed better results than rural areas and Upper Egypt. Household income has also gone up by at least 15%. That's a run through your headlines. All right then, let's move on to Brexit. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, has strongly hinted at a no-deal Brexit. He's asked businesses to prepare accordingly. However, Mr. Johnson says negotiators are continuing with talks. The EU, in the meantime, has laid out a backup plan to avoid disruptions to travel and fishing access in case of a no-deal Brexit. The UK formally left the bloc in January, but it's been in a transition period that is set to expire on the 31st of December. Negotiators from both sides have been in a deadlock, trying to figure out the outline of a post-Brexit trade deal, so far without success. The British Prime Minister and the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, failed to reach an agreement at dinner on Wednesday. They've, however, agreed to extend those talks until Sunday. Border checks and taxes could be introduced if both sides are unable to reach and ratify a deal by the end of the month. Let's bring you up to speed with the latest developments from that end of the world. Tony Waterman joins us now live from Brussels with the latest. Tony, it's perhaps a little bit ironic that Boris Johnson and the EU Commission President had a dinner that essentially was full of seafood last night, and yet fisheries and keeping a level playing field are two of the remaining points of disagreement here. What do both sides want on each of those matters?
Yeah, Ursula von der Leyen appears to have a sense of humor because fish was on the menu not just once but twice. And you're right, this is a major sticking point. What the EU is looking for is continued access to the very lucrative UK fishing waters. Some of the families here along the coastal communities and these boats, these fishermen have been fishing in these waters for decades and decades, and they want to maintain that access and they want to maintain it for a very long time. But for the UK, this is a breach of their sovereignty. This was one of the main things with Brexit, was to regain control of their waters, regain control of how they set their regulations. So this is one of the major sticking points, which is interesting because the fishing industry itself is very economically insignificant for both the EU and for the UK. You're talking about less than a fraction of 1% of GDP, but it's a very political issue. It's a very emotive issue. And this is part of the reason why they're fighting so hard over this one, but not the only outstanding issue at this point. The biggest hurdle that needs to be cleared is on the level playing field, ensuring that there is going to be fair competition between EU and UK businesses when this transition period ends. And what the EU is concerned about is that in the future there is going to be divergences when it comes to standards around labor and around environment, and these divergences are going to create an unfair competitive advantage for UK companies. So they want the power to be able to impose tariffs to re-level the playing field, and the UK wants none of that. They see this as a de facto way of making them stay aligned with EU rules. The other outstanding issue is on governance, how this is going to be policed. That took on new significance over the past couple of months when the UK tabled some legislation that would have broken parts of the divorce deal. But those are the outstanding issues right now. But as you mentioned, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, just in the last 20 minutes here, telling citizens, UK citizens, and also businesses to get ready for a no-deal scenario.
Indeed. So how's the matter of the border between Ireland, which is still part of the EU, and Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, how's that border to be treated in the event of a deal and in the event that the UK crashes out of the EU without a deal this weekend?
Well, the withdrawal agreement, which was signed just about a year ago, kind of took care of all of those issues. So Northern Ireland, which, as you know, is part of the UK, it is going to continue to follow most EU rules at the end of the year. The UK itself will not, and this is so that goods can continue to flow between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland without there needing to be a hard border. There was so much concern about the Good Friday Agreement perhaps being jeopardized with a hard border being built, but there are going to have to be regulatory checks now on goods passing from Great Britain. So Scotland, Wales, and Britain, going into Northern Ireland. And this is where we're getting a little bit of the pushing point here. This is the only area where there's going to be regulations. There was a lot of anxiety that was brought up in the last couple of months here because in September, the Johnson administration tabled this domestic internal market bill, which they said would be sort of the safety net if talks ended up failing. But what it did was allow ministers to override certain parts of the Brexit divorce deal, including this Northern Ireland protocol. That caused a lot of anxiety, a lot of mistrust, and a lot of anger and frustration here in Brussels. But just this week, just the other day, the UK and the EU came to an agreement. They said that they would do the full implementation of that withdrawal agreement, deal or no deal, and they would scrap those very controversial clauses.
Indeed. One last question for you, Tony. I mean, ultimately, the pitch by Brexiteers, as you pointed out, was about taking back control of the country's sovereignty, its ability to make its own policy decisions and make its own rules. But given that goal, it doesn't look like there's any way in which Boris Johnson can agree to the EU's demands on fishing rights or using some of the same standards and rules as the EU, because that, by definition, is giving up sovereignty.
Yeah, this is very much the crux of the issue here. How do you square that circle? These are two countries that have opposing views on what this future relationship should look like. For the EU, the single market is their prized treasure. This is 450 million people, goods and services and people flow across without really any sort of interruption. And it's something that's not seen anywhere else in the world. And they're not just going to give away free access to this, tariff-free and quota-free, without something in return. And that something in return has to be a level playing field. It has to be this fair competition to make sure that the single market is not undercut, that competition is not undercut. And this is going to be very difficult because part of the agreement and part of what Brussels is saying is that if you want this access, then we need to have level playing field and we need to have access to your fishing waters. And this is why it's becoming so difficult in these negotiations, because the vast majority of this deal has already been agreed to, upwards of 95%. But it is these final issues that are proving to be so incredibly difficult. But, you know, all good politicians somehow manage to find a way to make it seem as if they're winning even when they're compromising. So at the end of the day, we still could see an agreement, but time getting very, very short here. We're now just 3 weeks away from December 31st.
Indeed, and of course we're looking forward to seeing the outcome of those talks on the 13th of December. Tony Waterman in Brussels, thank you. Now, a report from the Asian Development Bank says that developing Asia, that's a group of about 45 nations in the Asia Pacific, is on course to have its GDP shrink this year. But the contraction, though, will be less than previously thought as China recovers faster than expected. Growth in the world's most populous nation is estimated to hit about 2.1%. That's much faster than the ADB's September estimate of 1.8%. The report also says economic output in developing Asia will shrink by 0.4% this year. Now, this year's economic contraction will be the region's first in nearly 6 decades. For 2021, the region is forecast to recover and grow at nearly 7% as Asian economies gradually recover from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Israeli tech firms have descended on Dubai to take part in the region's largest tech trade show as diplomatic ties between Israel and the UAE continue to improve. CGTN's Jim Stenman found this report.
Distributed clouds, enhanced connectivity, artificial intelligence. Hottest trends on display at GITEX, the Middle East's largest tech trade show, this year attracting some 1,200 exhibitors from 60+ countries in the middle of a global pandemic.
Now, this week-long event, now in its 40th edition, has never put on a show quite like this before. Not only is it billed one of the tech world's first major in-person events during COVID-19, it also has an entire day dedicated to UAE-Israel collaboration, something that just a few months ago would have been unthinkable.
Israeli think the road is from gold here.
The recent normalization agreement between the two nations is good for business. So say members of Israel's tech scene, many of whom are in Dubai for the very first time.
The smartness and all this innovation thinking of Dubai, it's kind of opened us, all of the Israeli companies, startup companies, to explore new opportunities, new markets.
With one of the scooters company, Israeli company invested here. We will be open to invest here also.
And that could be music to the ears of the UAE as the oil-rich diversify its economy. Israel, known for its thriving startup scene, has built a tech ecosystem that could serve as a blueprint for the Emirates' own future.
And clearly from the numbers, whether it's the amount of investment or the output as technologies around the world, you know that Israel has done it in the right way.
While drawing on those lessons would have been nearly impossible in the past, the two countries now enjoy direct flights and visa-free travel. Logistics giant DP World estimates initial bilateral trade could be in the region of $5 billion. The UAE also has significant sovereign wealth funds that could invest into Israeli tech, which has relied heavily on foreign direct investment from China and the US.
They might, yes. I'd be happier to see companies operating here.
Both Israel and the UAE are betting big on smart technology, which could transform the very future of our cities, especially in areas such as mobility. Dubai has an ambitious target of 25% of driverless vehicles by 2030. Emirate an ideal place for piloting Israeli projects.
Both governments declared that they're taking the risk of taking the holistic approach of supportive regulation, of taking the risk financially. And again, those things go hand in hand with promoting joint projects and collaboration.
And learning from Israel could be a good opportunity for the UAE as it moves to a knowledge-based economy and becoming an innovation hub, a trend that's only likely to accelerate given historic low oil demand during the ongoing coronavirus pandemic.
It wants to be a centre for tech innovation, tech investment and tech startups. So whether it's smart cities, cybersecurity tech, agricultural technology, all of those areas are important to the UAE and to Israel to sell externally around the world, but also to develop the economies locally.
While it's difficult to predict what the future might hold, there are certainly the building blocks for a partnership that could help usher in a brighter future, perhaps the region at large. Jim Stenman, CGTN, Dubai.
More than 20 months after it was grounded for deadly crashes, Boeing 737 MAX took back to the skies on Wednesday with an incident-free commercial flight in Brazil. The low-cost carrier Gol's flight 4104 from Sao Paulo arrived safely in the southern city of Porto Alegre. So Boeing hopes that this flight will help to turn the page on a badly damaging crisis in the wake of the twin crashes, one in Indonesia and one in Ethiopia in March last year. Now, most travelers aboard the aircraft, which is about 88% booked, took little notice of the model number painted on the plane. Gol's crew, for their part, made no mention of the fact that this was the first commercial flight for the 737 MAX since its worldwide grounding in March 2019.
The flight was normal, as if with any other aircraft. Accidents do happen, but if she was corrected and flew a perfect flight, I have nothing to complain about.
It was my first time flying. I felt a chill in my stomach, but it was cool, very normal.
Lawmakers in Indonesia are planning to take up a rather controversial bill that has been put on hold for 4 years. The House of Representatives is seeking a nationwide ban on the consumption, distribution and production of alcohol. Experts are arguing that if this bill is passed, it will heavily affect the tourism industry and thousands of jobs. CGTN's Silkina Alwalia has more from Jakarta.
It's been a plan 5 years in the making. Indonesian lawmakers are now seeking the government's support to seriously regulate alcohol in the country. The bill has been on hold since 2015 and was proposed by two Islam-based parties.
We are trying to regulate hard liquor drinks only. Those types of alcoholic drinks have caused the death of many of Indonesia's youth. So, on a constitutional level, we believe removing alcohol can be a solution for that issue.
However, this bill will affect production, distribution, and consumption of alcohol on a major level. That could lead to the demise of thousands of businesses across the country. The Indonesian government is already working on reducing the unemployment rate in the country, the COVID-19 pandemic. Passing this bill would clash with their efforts of creating as many jobs as possible moving forward. Although lawmakers say businesses can still operate under a new permit, restaurant manager Ansel is already preparing for the worst.
Alcoholic drinks will slowly disappear if the main ingredients of these drinks are difficult to access. So people who are not aware will just mix whatever liquor is available. This could also result in an increase in imported beverages. Local businesses will just eventually fade away.
Several exceptions to the ban include alcohol use in traditional rituals, religious ceremonies, or in pharmaceutical products. Experts worry these strict regulations would only strengthen the bootleg liquor industry.
That is certainly a given. Many of these illegal drink producers actually work in the pharmaceutical industry. Sometimes they mix the drinks with medicine and chemicals like disinfectant. This bill, who have connections to authorities responsible for the alcohol permits.
Indonesia is also one of the countries that apply high taxes on imported alcoholic beverages. If the bill is passed, it could heavily affect the country's economy. Silkina Alwalia, Jakarta.
Many South Africans turned to online and offline video gaming in order to pass the time during the lockdown imposed to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, growth in that particular space has been steady over the last 9 years, but it accelerated a lot since March 2020 when those pandemic restrictions were put in place. The gaming market after Egypt on the continent, it generates revenue of at least $216 million a year. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with that report.
PM Universal Gaming Director Mandla Makachawa ran a gaming cafe in Soweto before COVID-19 hit. It was closed for the lockdown and the township's gamers went indoors.
We saw a lot of kids going online, especially with mobile gaming. We have probably 70 players who play online every day, but I see more gamers coming up, getting these consoles and buying subscriptions and data because now they see the need of gaming online.
PM's top player, 17-year-old Tumelo Tsekari, spends an average of 6 hours gaming a day.
In the lockdown, that's when my gameplay changed. Like I've been playing on an upper level since. During lockdown, I was sleeping, waking up, PlayStation, eat, sleep, wait, play.
South Africa has 11 million gamers. With movement and social interaction massively constrained by the pandemic, the community is growing.
Socializing within gaming was this amazing space that people started to realize actually exists, that people are talking on games and interacting with one another. And, you know, that I think helped alleviate a lot of the stress that came from being in lockdown. And he found that there was a huge uptake in gaming and a new audience that came through that.
Lower data costs and better infrastructure has contributed to the rapid rise. Affordable and reliable internet access, however, remains hurdles in poorer areas too.
With the game that I'm playing, Taken, I don't usually compete a lot. I have to go to the suburbs so that I can get fiber. With what I'm using, so it's a bit slow. However, with FIFA, we've experienced a few problems. With the servers being down, they still need to put more servers in South Africa.
COVID-19 has boosted South Africa's video gaming industry by a few levels. More people than ever before are playing on PCs and mobile devices. That growth is expected to continue, with South Africa introducing tighter restrictions as a second wave looms. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Yeah, quick run through commodity prices. Let's start with oil. Brent going up over $50 a barrel. The last time we had these sort of prices, it was back in March. And of course, at that point in time, it was languishing under $40 a barrel after, of course, the wave of lockdown started to come in around the world. WTI crude not far behind either. Futures due in January rose by over 4% to $47.36 a barrel at 15:46 GMT. That essentially trims its year-to-date decline to just about 15.5%. Copper continues to have a pretty strong year as well. 3-month forwards in London over $7,700 a tonne. That's up at least 25% so far in 2020. Here's what's coming up next. COVID-19 restrictions are leading to a growth of enterprises in South Africa's townships. We'll have that story when we come back. Welcome back. South Africa's townships have always been a hive of entrepreneurial activity, but the oversaturation of certain sectors has affected their odds of success. Big shopping malls and fashion stores also tend to draw clients right out of the township, and that sort of makes it difficult for smaller enterprises to compete. But tonight on Grassroots, CGTN's Samrita Naidu explores how the pandemic lockdowns created some unexpected opportunities for local traders in South Africa's townships.
Khakiso Letokoto manages a small business called Kasi Convenience. The distribution business has been running for a year now, Township fast food market in Soweto. But it was the lockdown that helped Kasi Convenience become a household name.
You've got, a lot of people that work in the townships work outside of the township, right, in town, Sandton, wherever. So all those people came back, they were at home. So in a sense, you had all that buying power concentrated in the townships. For me, it's a phenomenon that the townships themselves have never encountered before. Because of it improved the economy of the township to have that rand circulating within the township.
With everyone stuck at home, Kasi Convenience became just that, a convenient door-to-door delivery service just a phone call away.
It improved our sales. I mean, after the lockdown on the 23rd of March, we then came back online early May, and of course we started slow just to assess whether there's business out there. In no time, we were back to big numbers, volumes of orders that we were pushing before, and it was remarkable to witness that. Our business quickly went back to the level of volumes that I think were impressive. In fact, for me, I wish the lockdown could just be prolonged.
Soweto is one of the largest townships in Africa with a population of 1.6 million. Street food is culture and is a booming market.
At the moment, we cover two categories, being your segment, which is your tuck shops that sell your bunny chows, and your flame grilled segment. These are your chicken dust, we call them chicken dust here in the townships. They basically sell your grilled chickens. We try to cover a wide range of products. We've got your charcoal, we've got your briquettes, got maize meal.
COVID has been so hard for so many, but Letokoto and his team found a way to make it work for them. Kasi Convenience was started to help people social distance and stay safe. Today, the township business is thriving. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Soweto, South Africa.
All right then, so let's make a quick run through the currencies as we wrap up the program. So Kenya did hold its weekly debt auction today. The bids, well, they were well below the target amounts. The state had about $218 million on offer in 90, 180 and 360-day notes at $89.5 million. The bids received were just 41% of the target. The lowest performance rate was on the 182-day note at about 30.2%. South Africa's rand dipped under the 15 rand to the dollar mark in early trading before giving up some of those gains. 15.0363 at 15.42 GMT was a number. Current account data earlier today was pretty interesting. It pointed to a surplus equal to 5.9% of GDP, and that is a 4-decade high. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.